Hey, the word felt like swallowing glass. It scratched its way up my throat, a foreign, ugly thing. You looking for company tonight? My own voice was unrecognizable, a cheap, breathy whisper that the girl I used to be would never have known. Have you ever been so ashamed of the sounds coming out of your own mouth that you wanted to physically rip them from the air? That was me, standing there in a dress that was too tight and too short, under strobe lights that made everyone look like broken, twitching mannequins. The man didn't even turn his head at first. He just swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice cubes clinking a slow, lazy rhythm against the thumping music. He was older, 30 maybe, dressed in a dark, tailored suit that probably cost more than my rent for the entire year. He looked bored, tired of the world, tired of girls like me. He finally glanced over, his eyes scanning me from my worn-out heels to my carefully applied, trembling smile. How much? The question was flat, devoid of interest, like asking for the price of a newspaper he had no intention of reading. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had practiced this in the mirror of the grimy staff bathroom, but the number felt absurd, impossible on my tongue. $500. Is that okay? A short, bitter laugh escaped his lips. It wasn't a sound of amusement, it was a sound of dismissal. He turned back to his drink. My world, which had been hanging precariously on that single question, began to crumble. This was it, my one shot, my only chance. I had to, for Sunday. He was about to wave me away when he seemed to stop, a flicker of something, maybe pity, maybe just morbid curiosity in his eyes. He pulled out a leather wallet, the sound of the soft material unfolding seeming louder than the music. He tossed a few bills onto the small table between us. There, get yourself a real drink and leave me alone. But I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen. My desperation must have been a stench he could smell over the cologne and spilled liquor. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. He let out a heavy sigh, a man burdened by the entire world, and finally looked at me again. Really looked at me. He drained his glass in one go, the sound of it hitting the table a sharp crack of finality. All right, he said, his voice low and gravelly. He stood up, towering over me. Let's go. He led me out of the deafening noise of the private karaoke lounge, his hand loosely on my back, a gesture that was less about guidance and more about hurting an animal. We didn't speak in the elevator. We didn't speak in the taxi. The silence was filled with the slick sound of tires on wet city streets and the frantic, silent prayer echoing in my head. Please, let this be enough. Please, God, let this be enough. The hotel was one of those tall, anonymous glass towers that scrape the sky. The lobby was all marble and hushed whispers. He handled the check-in with an air of practiced indifference, taking the key card without making eye contact with the receptionist or with me. Inside the room, the silence was even louder. It was cold, sterile, smelling of cleaning chemicals and nothing else. He locked the door behind us, the click of the bolt echoing in the cavernous space. His voice was a low rumble. Go take a shower. Get clean. I nodded, grabbing a thick, white towel from the bathroom rack and shutting the door behind me, my hands shaking so hard I could barely turn the handle. I stood under the spray, the water scalding hot, and scrubbed my skin until it was raw, as if I could wash away not just the grime of the city, but the shame that was seeping into my bones. He was paying for this. I couldn't disappoint him. When I came out, wrapped in the towel, my hair dripping onto the plush carpet, he was already waiting. He had showered too, in a different bathroom I hadn't even noticed. He wore only a towel wrapped low around his waist, He wasn't rushing. He just sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, looking at me with those same tired, unreadable eyes. I lay down on the bed, my body stiff as a board. My mind was screaming. A man in his 30s, successful, unmarried. He had needs. I understood that on a clinical level, and finding girls like me. It was a transaction. Simple, clean, a service rendered. That's what this was supposed to be, a job. But my heart felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I was so afraid I would do it wrong, that he wouldn't be satisfied. He broke the silence. "How old are you?" His voice was softer now. He was looking at my face, at the youth I couldn't hide no matter how much makeup I wore. 22, I whispered. 22. An age where other girls were graduating from college, celebrating with their families, dreaming of careers and futures. And here I was. How many of the girls who did this for a living had diplomas hanging on their walls? "How many times have you done this?" he asked, a strange curiosity in his tone. I didn't know what to say. If I told him it was the first time, would he even believe me? Of course not. Nobody would. So I just shook my head, unable to form a word. He seemed to find this amusing. "So, what? This is the first time," he pressed, a smirk playing on his lips. Again, I just shook my head. A lie, but a necessary one. Suddenly, he laughed. A real laugh this time, deep and throaty. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "All right. Tonight, you're with me. If I'm satisfied," he said, the word hanging in the air. "I'll give you 5,000. 5,000. My breath caught in my chest. That was more money than I'd seen in my life. It was a chance. A real chance for Sunday. Hesitantly, awkwardly, I leaned over and pressed my lips to his chest. My movements were clumsy, uncertain. I slowly, carefully, reached for the edge of the towel at his waist. As my fumbling fingers worked at the knot, I could feel a shift in him, a wave of irritation. Was I really this clueless, or was this just an act? Was I playing the part of the innocent virgin to gain his sympathy? He probably thought it was the latter. In this business, wasn't every girl an actress? Weren't they all pretending, just to get a little more pity, a little more cash? I was staring, frozen, at the reality of the situation laid bare before me, when a shrill, piercing sound cut through the tension in the room. My phone, ringing. A frantic, desperate sound. My blood ran cold. There was only one person who would call me at this hour. The hospital. Can I just take this? Please? It'll only be a minute, I stammered, the urgency in the ringing tone telling me this couldn't wait. I didn't even wait for his answer. I scrambled off the bed, my wet hair slapping against my back, and found my cheap purse on the floor. I answered the phone, my back to him. I couldn't hear what the nurse on the other end was saying. Not really. It was all a blur of medical terms and hushed panic. All I saw was Son's face, my boy. When the call ended, I was already pulling on my clothes, my hands fumbling with buttons and zippers. I have to go, I said, my voice choked. I'm so sorry. Can you call me tomorrow? I have to get to the hospital, right now. He sat up, leaning on his elbows, a strange expression on his face, annoyance mixed with something else. It was the middle of the night. What could possibly be so urgent at a hospital? He probably thought it was another trick, another part of the act. But he watched as I finished dressing, my movements frantic. I grabbed a pen and a crumpled receipt from my purse and scribbled my number on it. I pushed it into his hand. Call me tomorrow, I promise. I'll make it up to you. And then I was gone, running out of the room, leaving him sitting there on the perfectly made bed. He was annoyed, the mood completely broken, but for some reason, he didn't throw the piece of paper away. He tucked it into the pocket of his trousers, got dressed, and left. He figured maybe he'd need it later. Downstairs, outside the hotel's gleaming entrance, I was frantic. The city that never sleeps was suddenly deserted. Not a single taxi in sight. The late-night wind whipped through the canyon of skyscrapers, cutting right through my thin dress. I shivered, hugging myself, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. And then, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. It was him. He frowned at me. "What are you doing?" I can't get a cab," I said, my teeth chattering. "It's after midnight." He sighed again, that same world-weary sigh. He could have just driven off. It wasn't his problem. None of this was his problem. But he looked at me, this small, shivering girl in a cheap party dress. And maybe he felt a sliver of something. "Get in. Where are you going?" Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. "Really? Oh my God. Thank you." As I climbed into the warmth of his car, I had the fleeting thought that I must have done something truly terrible in a past life to get tangled up with such a complicated, frustrating man. He drove fast, navigating the empty streets with an easy confidence. When we pulled up to the imposing entrance of the city's main hospital, I barely managed to stammer out another thank you before I jumped out and sprinted towards the doors. He was about to pull away, to finally be rid of this bizarre, infuriating night, when he glanced at the passenger seat. Shit, my purse was still there. He muttered a curse under his breath, killed the engine, and got out of the car, chasing after me. But I was running, fueled by pure adrenaline, and he didn't even know my name to call out. So he just followed, feeling more and more like he'd been dragged into someone else's nightmare. He followed me through the sterile, echoing corridors, past the emergency room, and up to the pediatric ward. He stopped at the doorway of a room, watching as I burst inside and threw my arms around a tiny little boy, no older than 3 or 4, who was huddled on the bed, knees drawn to his chest. I was rocking him, whispering to him, stroking his hair. A nurse walking by noticed him lingering in the hallway. "Are you a friend of Rose's?" she asked kindly. He felt hypnotized, unable to answer her. Instead, he found himself asking a question of his own, his voice barely a whisper. "That little boy, is he her son?" "Yes, that's son," the nurse replied with a smile. "He's her son, her son. This girl, this 22-year-old girl, already had a child this old. Was she a single mother? Of course she was. What kind of husband would let his wife go out and sell her body for $500? The nurse, seeing his expensive suit and lost expression, tried again. "Are you her friend, sir? Or, are you her boss maybe?" He shook his head slowly. "I'm not her boss." What was he? They were nothing. Just a failed business transaction. A transaction of the flesh that never even happened. For some reason, looking at this well-dressed, handsome man, and then at the young mother inside, tenderly comforting her child, the nurse felt a strange impulse, a need to connect them. "You know," she said softly, leaning against the doorframe, "being a single mom isn't a crime these days. Rose and her boy, they've been through a lot, but she'd never want anyone's pity." He barely heard her. His mind was racing. "What's wrong with him?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the small child. "What's his illness?" The nurse's voice dropped. "He has leukemia. We're waiting for a bone marrow match." Leukemia. The word hit him like a physical blow. Of course. That's why she needed the money. That's why she was so desperate she was willing to do anything. And the father? Where was the father? Did he have no sense of responsibility for his own child? Suddenly, an image of his own mother flashed in his mind. She had been a single mother too, but she had been lucky. He had always been healthy, a strong kid. He'd spared her that particular burden. But what if he hadn't been? What if he'd been sick like this, and they had no money? Would his own mother, in her darkest moment of desperation, have considered walking down this same path? A wave of something profound and uncomfortable washed over him. Empathy. He no longer saw her as a nuisance, an inconvenience. He saw a mother fighting for her child's life, and in that moment, a new, unexpected thought began to form in his mind. The thought that maybe, just maybe, he could help. Inside the room, I held Son, humming a soft lullaby until his small body relaxed and his breathing evened out into the gentle rhythm of sleep. I carefully laid him back down on the pillows, kissing his warm, soft cheek. I would lose everything for you, my love, I thought. Everything but you. From the doorway, he saw the whole thing, and a strange, unfamiliar feeling began to stir in his chest. Once Son was settled, I realized my purse was gone. I calmly tried to retrace my steps. It had to be in his car. I remembered having it just before I got out at the hospital entrance. It was okay. There was nothing valuable in it anyway. A couple of cheap, knockoff brand lipsticks that no one would even want, and a drugstore makeup kit. It would cost maybe $10 to replace, but $10 was $10. Money Son needed. The thought made my shoulders slump with a familiar weariness. I picked up an empty plastic cup, intending to get some water from the cooler in the hall. When I reached the door, I saw him standing there. It was like seeing a lifeline. "Oh, you're still here?" I said, a wave of relief washing over me. He held up my purse. "Looking for this?" I rushed forward and took it. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry to have troubled you." "Who's in there?" he asked, his voice even. Though he already knew the answer, it was a test. In this day and age, you couldn't trust anyone. He knew some girls in these situations, the cunning ones, would lie. They'd say it was a nephew, a younger brother, never a son. That was baggage. But I wasn't like those other girls. Son wasn't my baggage. He was my anchor, my world, my son. "That's my son," I said, a soft pride in my voice that I couldn't hide. "He's just over 3 years old." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It seemed his intuition hadn't been wrong. "Where's his father?" His father? I didn't know. His face, his build, his age, his job. I knew nothing about him. Absolutely nothing. I just gave a small, sad smile and shook my head. He couldn't hide the disappointment in his eyes. Was it because I'd been with so many men I didn't know who the father was? Or was it something I just didn't want to talk about? I saw the judgment in his face, and I smiled again. A brighter, wider smile this time. "I know what you're thinking," I said, "but I promise you, it's not what you think." He looked even more confused. "You know what I'm thinking?" "Of course," I said, my smile never wavering. "I can see it in your eyes. It's okay. When people in my line of work say that, everyone thinks the same thing you're thinking right now." I smiled. I smiled so much. In my 22 years on this earth, the one thing I had learned for sure was that a smile could earn you money, but tears earned you nothing. So why cry? Crying was just exhausting. He was intrigued now. "So how are you different from the others in your line of work?" "Oh, very different," I said, my tone light, almost playful. "For example, they probably can't remember which client was their 100th or their 1000th. But you were my first. I let out a laugh then, a bright, tinkling sound, as if I'd just told the funniest joke in the world. But he didn't hear any humor in it. He just heard the shattering of something fragile. You have another difference too, he said, deciding to play along. Want me to tell you what it is? Sure, I said, still smiling. They can't become my mistress, but you can. My question hung in the air between us, a flimsy shield against his cold proposition. Has anyone ever told you, I said, my voice barely a whisper, that you're handsome, but you have a terrible sense of humor? He didn't even blink. He just watched me, his gaze intense, analytical. This isn't a joke, Rose. The way he said my name, the first time he'd used it, sent a shiver down my spine. It made this real. Why? I managed to ask. Why me? A flicker of something that might have been impatience crossed his face. He leaned against the wall, folding his arms. The fabric of his expensive suit stretched across a powerful chest. Look at it this way, he said, his voice low and dangerously reasonable. You need money, a lot of it, and you're willing to. Do what you are going to do tonight to get it. I'm offering you an alternative, an exclusive arrangement. Is that really worse than taking your chances with a different stranger every night? His words were like ice water, shocking me with their cold, brutal logic. Because he was right. Of course he was right. Wasn't this what people did? Make choices. And weren't all my choices just different shades of impossible? He thought I was hesitating, weighing the pros and cons of his business offer. But he had no idea where his question had sent me. It had thrown me backwards in time, back to the very first choice that had led me here, to this sterile hospital corridor at 2 a.m., negotiating the terms of my own surrender. Because before I was Son's mother, before I was Rose, the girl in the too tight dress, I was just a girl from a place that hope had forgotten. A small town in the middle of nowhere, a place where the rust on the abandoned factories was the brightest color for miles. My family lived under the thumb of my grandmother, a woman whose heart was as hard and barren as the land around us. She was from an older world, one where a family's worth was measured in sons. My mother, bless her gentle soul, had given her 4 daughters in a row. I was the 5th, and the last. My arrival had cost my mother her life. She bled out on the delivery table, and with her last breath, the light in our house went out for good. My father looked at me and saw the price of his wife's life. My older sisters, all but one, looked at me and saw the reason they were motherless. I grew up in a house full of ghosts and blame, a weed in a garden of sorrow. My only sanctuary was Lily, my second oldest sister. She was the one who held me when I cried, who braided my hair, who told me I wasn't a curse. She was my mother, my sister, my entire world. I thought we would be together forever. But when I was 18, 4 years ago, my grandmother fell ill, the kind of illness that costs a fortune we didn't have. And just like that, a solution appeared. A man, older, wealthy, a friend of a friend from the city. He was looking for a young, traditional wife. And Lily, my beautiful, vibrant Lily, was the price of our grandmother's medicine. I remember the day she left. She packed a single suitcase. She didn't cry in front of them, but she held me so tight in the hallway I thought my ribs would break. She promised she would call. She promised she would write. But the man took her away, and the silence she left behind was deafening. We never heard from her again. Our family had sold its only daughter with a soul, and in return, we got a few more months with the woman who had resented her for being born. The day I graduated high school, I packed my own bag. It was smaller than Lily's. I took my diploma, the naive, stupid dream of going to college, and ran. I ran to the city, the great, glittering metropolis I'd only seen in movies. I thought I could make a life there. I thought I could find a good job, save money, and one day I would find Lily. I would buy her back. Oh, what a fool I was. Have you ever been truly hungry? Not just missed a meal hungry, but the kind of deep, gnawing emptiness that makes the whole world feel gray and blurry. The city was a monster that swallowed girls like me whole. My diploma was worthless. My dreams were a joke. I was on my last dollar when I saw the ad. Hostesses wanted for exclusive downtown lounge. The picture showed smiling girls in elegant dresses, holding champagne flutes. I thought it was a waitressing job, a fancy one. It wasn't. It was my job to be pretty, to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, to pour drinks for men whose hands lingered a little too long, and to drink with them, to drink whatever they put in front of me. On my third night, I was assigned to a VIP room, a group of businessmen celebrating a deal. They thought it was hilarious, this small-town girl who'd never had hard liquor before. They kept pouring me shots, tequila, whiskey, things that burned all the way down. The last thing I remember is the room spinning, their laughter echoing like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I woke up in a hotel room I didn't recognize. The sheets were crisp and white. My head felt like it had been split open with an axe, and I was naked. There was a dull, deep ache between my legs, and a smear of blood on the sheets. Next to the bed, on the nightstand, was a thick stack of $100 bills, $2,000. I knew, in that single, horrifying moment, what I had lost and what it was worth. I stumbled back to the lounge in a daze and threw the money at my manager. I screamed at him. I demanded to know who the man was. He just laughed, a greasy, placating smile on his face. He told me he didn't know that I'd had too much to drink and left with a client. Then he pushed another $2,000 into my hand, a month's salary. Hush money. I stood there on a dirty city sidewalk, holding $4,000, more money than my family had seen in years. A bitter, hysterical thought bubbled up inside me. This is more than they got for Lily. Just then, my phone rang. The screen said, "Dad." For a wild, hopeful second, I thought he was worried, that he was calling to ask me to come home, that he missed me. But it wasn't him. It was my third sister, her voice sharp and cold as a shard of glass. "You little bitch," she hissed. "You really did it, huh? Copied Lily and ran away. Well, good. Don't you ever bother coming back. This family doesn't want a mother killer anyway." I don't remember what she said after that. Her voice became a meaningless buzz in my ear. A mother killer. After all these years, that's all I still was to them. I ended the call, pulled the SIM card out of my cheap phone, and snapped it in half. I threw the pieces into a street grate and swore to myself that I would die alone in this city before I ever went back to that house. And in that moment, standing on that street corner, with $4,000 of blood money in my pocket, and a hole where my heart used to be, I made my choice. Or maybe the choice was made for me. The hum of the hospital lights brought me back to the present, back to him. Mark, that was his name. He had told me in the car. He was still watching me, waiting for an answer. My long silence hadn't seemed to bother him. He was right. I needed money. Son needed medicine, treatments, a miracle. And I had a job during the day, a real job, working at a garment factory. The pay was barely enough to cover the rent on our tiny, crumbling apartment. It would never be enough to save my son's life. This path, the one I was about to walk down tonight, was the only one I had left. And Mark's offer, it wasn't a joke. It was a contract, a gilded cage. But maybe, just maybe, it was safer than the jungle. "Okay," I whispered, the sound swallowed by the cavernous hallway. I looked up, meeting his eyes, forcing myself to be steady. "I'll do it." Then, Because I had to hold on to some small piece of myself, I added a condition. But I have another job during the day, so this arrangement, it's only for the nights. He considered this for a moment, then gave a slight nod. That's fine. I don't have any needs during the day. He pulled out his phone. Tomorrow, call the lounge and quit. You work for me now. Okay, I said. I should go, he said. I'll call you when I need you. He turned to leave, and I thought that was it. The deal was done. But then I blurted out, "What? What's your name?" He stopped, turning back slightly. "Mark," he said, and then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the long, empty corridor, leaving me alone with the choice I had just made. Just like that, I became his mistress. The whole night felt like a fever dream, a bizarre, terrifying, and strangely hopeful dream. The next morning, Mark went to visit a colleague who was in the hospital. As fate, or karma, or some cruel cosmic joke would have it, his colleague was in the very same hospital as Sunday. After a brief, polite visit, some unseen force pulled him towards the pediatric oncology ward. He found Sun's room. My son was sitting up in bed, looking out the window. When Mark walked in, Sun's face lit up, the way a lonely child's does when a new person enters their small world. "Who are you looking for, mister?" Sun asked, his voice small but clear. "I'm a friend of your mom's," Mark said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I came to visit you." It was only then, in the clear light of day, that Mark really looked at my son's face. He saw a flicker of something familiar in the boy's features, a resemblance to someone he'd met before, but he couldn't place it. It didn't matter, anyway. He was just here to be kind. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mommy calls me Sun," my boy said proudly. "Sun?" Mark repeated, a little confused. It was an unusual name. Sun, thinking the man didn't understand, puffed out his little chest and explained, just as I had taught him. "Not S-O-N, S-U-N, like the sun in the sky. Mommy says I'm her sunshine." Mark froze for a second. That name, that explanation, it struck a chord deep inside him. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Sunday, that's a beautiful name." My son, praised by this handsome stranger, beamed. "I think so too." Mark was charmed. Sun was a sweet boy, polite and well-mannered despite everything. He was the kind of son Mark hoped he might have himself one day. He stayed and played with Sun for 10 minutes before he had to get back to work, promising to bring him lots of presents next time. 3 days passed. He didn't call. With every passing hour, a cold dread seeped into my heart. Had he changed his mind, decided I wasn't worth the trouble? I wanted to call him, to ask, but I realized with a jolt that I didn't have his number. All I could do was wait, and with every ring of my phone that wasn't him, the humiliation grew. He had played me for a fool. Then, on the evening of the 4th day, my phone finally rang. It was him. His voice was thick, slurred. He was drunk. He gave me an address, a hotel, and hung up. When I knocked on the door, he pulled me inside, and his mouth was on mine, hungry and rough. It wasn't like the cold, detached man I'd met before. This was someone else, desperate, out of control. He pushed me onto the bed and tore at my clothes before I could even say a word. It was nothing like the first time. That other time, I had been unconscious, oblivious. This time, I was awake for every clumsy, painful second. I knew nothing. I had no experience. All I could do was lie there, still and silent, and let him do what he wanted. After what felt like an eternity, it was over. He collapsed beside me, breathing heavily. The drunken fog seemed to have lifted from his eyes. He looked over at me, really looked at me, and saw my lower lip, swollen and bleeding where I'd bitten it to keep from crying out. A wave of remorse washed over his face. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They drugged me again. At a work dinner. I couldn't control myself. I'm so sorry, Rose." His apology was so unexpected, so sincere. It instantly extinguished the small, bitter flame of resentment in my heart. Who apologizes to a woman he's paying for? "It's okay," I whispered back. "I'm okay. I'll take a shower," he said, sitting up. "Then I'll take you back to the hospital." As I lay there, waiting, his words echoed in my mind. They drugged me again. So, this had happened before. It made sense. A man as self-possessed as him wouldn't normally act with such desperation. He must have enemies. In a city like this, what business didn't involve sharks and backstabbers? When he was done, I showered too, scrubbing myself clean before heading back to my son. I didn't want Son to see me like this, tainted and weary. The days fell into a strange rhythm after that. I'd work at the factory, then spend the evenings and nights by Son's bedside. Mark called occasionally, but not often, just a few times a month. I thought maybe he was taking pity on me, giving me more time with my son. But every month, without fail, a significant amount of money appeared in my bank account. Until one night, months later, after the now familiar ritual in the bedroom of his sleek, minimalist apartment, I was getting dressed to go back to the hospital. "Does Son have to be at the hospital 24/7?" he asked from the bed. "No, not always," I said, pulling on my jeans. "Then why don't I ever see you take him home?" I finished buttoning my shirt and sighed. The truth is, the hospital is better than our apartment. It's clean. The nurses check on him. The place we live in, it's not good. Our home was in a decaying tenement building, a place where the mold grew faster than the rent went up. It was all I could afford. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You and Son should move in here." The words hung in the air, a proposition so outlandish, so utterly outside the bounds of our sordid little arrangement that I couldn't process it. "What?" I breathed. "Move in," he repeated, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, as if he were offering me a cup of coffee. That's not possible," I stammered. "This is your home. I'm your mistress. How could I bring my sick child into the pristine, ordered life of the man who paid for my body?" The two worlds couldn't collide. They would annihilate each other. He saw the panic in my eyes, the silent, screaming list of reasons why this was a terrible, dangerous idea. So he appealed to the one thing I couldn't argue with: logic. "Why not?" he said, his voice calm and steady. "This house is just me. It's too big, too quiet. You and Son can have the whole upstairs wing. It would be less empty. And whenever Son needs to go to the hospital, I can drive you both. It's easier. He made it sound so practical, a matter of logistics, but I heard the unspoken word hiding beneath it all. Lonely. He was lonely, and he was offering my son a clean, warm place to live. He was offering us safety, stability. It was a deal with the devil, maybe, but this devil had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. The fight went out of me. The tension that had held my spine rigid for years suddenly dissolved, and a wave of gratitude so powerful, it felt like grief washed over me. I took a step forward, and then another, and then I did something that wasn't in our contract. I wrapped my arms around his waist and buried my face in his chest. My shoulders started to shake. "You're too good to me," I sobbed into the soft fabric of his shirt. "Why are you so good to me? On this entire planet, only 2 people had ever shown me true, unselfish kindness. My sister Lily, who was lost to me, and now this man, this stranger, this client. He was stiff for a moment, surprised by the contact. Then, his arms came around me, holding me gently. He stroked my hair. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's all going to be okay." A few days later, we moved. The contrast was staggering. We left behind a 2-room apartment that always smelled of damp and desperation, a place where the cockroaches were braver than the tenants, and we walked into a house that smelled of leather and clean air and money. It was all glass and steel and polished wood, a minimalist palace where every object had its place. For Sun, it was heaven. He had never seen a space so big. He ran from room to room, his small feet pattering on the hardwood floors, his laughter echoing in the high ceilings. He touched everything: the smooth surface of a marble countertop, the soft texture of a velvet armchair, a strange twisted sculpture on a pedestal. I followed behind him, a nervous shadow. "Son, honey, be careful. Don't touch that, please. That's Uncle Mark's. If it breaks." "Mommy doesn't have the money to fix it." Mark, who had been watching from the doorway with a small, amused smile, spoke up. "Rose, it's okay. Let him explore. They're just things." Sun stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide. He turned to Mark, clasped his tiny hands behind his back, and bowed his head slightly. "I'm sorry, Uncle Mark," he said formally. "The things are just very beautiful." Mark's smile faltered, replaced by an expression of profound tenderness. He crouched down to Sun's level. "It's okay, buddy. Nothing in here is more beautiful than your mom. You know that, right?" My heart ached with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride for my sweet, polite boy, and sorrow that I couldn't give him a world filled with beautiful things myself. I picked him up and hugged him tight. "Mommy will buy you lots of toys tomorrow, okay?" I promised. A lie I couldn't afford. That night, after I'd finally settled a very overexcited Sun into his new, impossibly soft bed, I found Mark in his home office. He was hunched over his laptop, the screen reflecting complex charts and graphs on his face. The bold heading on the document read, Q4 Strategic Development. I had made him a cup of coffee. I placed it gently on his desk. "You should take a break," I said softly. "Almost done," he mumbled. Not looking up, I lingered in the doorway, my curiosity getting the better of me. "What is it that you do, exactly?" He finally leaned back, stretching his arms over his head. "I'm the head of marketing for a tech firm." He looked at me, a wry smile on his lips. "Why? You thinking of a career change?" I felt my cheeks flush. "No, You have a nice house and a nice car. It must pay well." He laughed, a low, tired sound. "It pays the bills, enough to keep me afloat." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "And you?" I smiled, a little embarrassed, and then my eyes fell on the wastebasket beside his desk. It was full of crumpled sheets of high-quality paper. They were printed on one side with dense spreadsheets and corporate jargon. The other side was pristine, white, empty. "Hey," I said, pointing. "Are you just throwing those away?" He glanced at the bin. "Yeah, it's trash. Can I have them?" He looked at me, completely baffled. "Why? It's just old paperwork. The other side is still good," I said simply. He just shrugged, a look of utter confusion on his face. "Sure, take it. It's all yours." I gathered the discarded papers, a thick stack of them, and left him to his work, feeling like I'd just won the lottery. A few days later, he found out why I'd wanted them. He came home from work early, and the house was quiet. He walked upstairs and found Sun sitting on the floor of his new room, completely absorbed. He was surrounded by Mark's discarded financial reports and market analyses, and on the clean, white backs of those pages, my son was drawing. He was creating entire universes of colorful superheroes and roaring dinosaurs, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Mark just stood in the doorway and watched, and a feeling he couldn't name swelled in his chest. He had never realized how poor someone had to be to see a blank piece of paper as a treasure. The next day, he left work at noon. He went to the biggest toy store in the city and bought a professional set of colored pencils, markers, sketch pads, and a giant, intricate superhero building set he knew son would love. As he paid, he found himself smiling. He wasn't just buying toys. He was buying a piece of a normal childhood for this little boy. And maybe he was buying a piece of uncomplicated happiness for himself. He came home, the bags rustling in his hands, and found the house quiet again. He assumed I wasn't back from the factory yet. He headed upstairs to son's room, intending to surprise him. The door was slightly ajar. He heard our voices inside, soft and low. He was about to push the door open when he heard son's excited declaration. "Look, Mommy, I'm drawing our family." Mark froze, his hand hovering over the doorknob. "Oh, that's beautiful, sweetie," he heard me say. "Who is that?" "That's you," son said. "And that's me. And that's Uncle Mark." There was a short pause. Then son asked the question, the one that every single mother dreads, the one that had been hanging in the air between us since the day we moved in. "Mommy, is Uncle Mark my daddy?" The silence that followed was so heavy, Mark felt he could touch it. He could picture my face, the forced, bright smile I would be wearing to hide the heartbreak. When I finally spoke, my voice was impossibly gentle, a lullaby of loving lies. "No, sweetie," I said softly. "Uncle Mark is just Mommy's very, very good friend. Your daddy, he's on a very important trip, in a place very far away. But when you're a big boy, as big and strong as Uncle Mark, he's going to come home. Okay?" "Okay," son whispered, his voice small with disappointment. "Now, you stay here and finish your masterpiece," I said, my voice cheerful again. "Mommy's going to go downstairs and start dinner. I bet Uncle Mark will be home soon." He heard me stand up. He saw my shadow fall across the sliver of light under the door. I pulled it open and gasped, my hand flying to my chest when I saw him standing there. My eyes darted from his stone-like face to the colorful toy store bags in his hands, and then back again. I had no idea how much he had heard. You're home early," I stammered. "Yeah, just got here," he said, his voice tight. He looked past me, into the room at son, who was still hunched over his drawing, oblivious. He cleared his throat. "Go on. Go get changed. I'll hang out with him for a bit. Then," he added, his voice rough, "and don't cook dinner. I got my bonus today. We're going out." I just nodded, unable to speak, and fled to my room. When I came back, showered and changed, son was on the floor, his face a mask of pure ecstasy, surrounded by the pieces of his new superhero set. Mark was sitting on the floor with him, patiently showing him how the pieces fit together. That night, we went to a restaurant where the tablecloths were white and the water glasses were made of crystal. The three of us, sitting there, we could have been a family. A handsome, successful father, a young, beautiful mother, and their adorable son. We looked perfect. Then the waiter handed me a menu. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The cheapest appetizer was $30. A simple steak was $90. My eyes scanned the prices, each number a small heart attack. What kind of food could possibly cost this much? I was trying to discreetly find the least expensive item on the page when Mark gently took the menu from my hands. "I'll order," he said softly. He turned to the waiter and, without looking at the prices, ordered a feast. Steaks, crab soup, lobster, a half dozen other things I'd never even heard of. "Mark, that's too much," I whispered, mortified. "We'll never be able to eat all that." He just smiled at me. "Don't worry, we'll manage." Then he turned to me and Son, his expression serious. "Any allergies? Seafood? Anything?" "No," I mumbled, overwhelmed. After the meal, he paid with a black credit card, signing the bill without even glancing at the total. He folded the receipt and put it in his pocket, a quiet act of kindness, shielding me from the reality of what a single night in his world really cost. Later that night, after Son was asleep, I found him on the bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. "Are you okay?" I asked, sitting beside him. "Is something wrong at work?" He shook his head. I did what I always did when he seemed troubled. I gently guided his head onto my lap and began to massage his temples, my fingers working in slow, soothing circles. The silence stretched on, comfortable and familiar. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I have a question, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to." "Okay," I said, my hands never stopping their gentle rhythm. He had never been one to pry into my life. Our arrangement was built on a foundation of unspoken truths and things left unsaid. But ever since we moved in, something had shifted. He wanted to know more. He needed to know more. "Son's father," he began, his voice hesitant. Does he even know Son exists?" His assumption was that no man with a heart could know he had a child in the world suffering like this and simply do nothing. My fingers stilled for a second. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I don't think so." He let out a small sigh. It wasn't the answer he was hoping for. I smiled a little. "Do you want to hear Son's story?" He nodded. "Tell me." And so I told him. I told him everything. Not about my family, not about the house full of hate I'd run from. I couldn't bear to speak of that. But I told him how Son came to be. I took a deep breath, the scent of his skin, and the clean laundry smell of his sheets filling my senses. After that night, I began, my voice soft in the quiet room. The night I told you about. I was completely alone. I'd just thrown away the only family I had. I had this money, this dirty money, and no idea what to do with it. My hands kept moving, a steady, rhythmic comfort against his skin, as if the motion itself could help me pull the story out. But I got lucky. Just once, the universe decided to be kind. I met a woman named Clara. She was older, one of the supervisors at the garment factory where I found work. She had this big, booming laugh and a heart to match. She saw right through me, saw how lost I was. She took me under her wing, found me that little apartment, even furnished it with things from her own home. For a while, for about a month, I felt safe. I told him how Clara had gotten married to a man who adored her and moved upstate. How, as a wedding gift, she had paid my rent for 3 months in advance, so I wouldn't have to worry. We still talked on the phone sometimes. She was happy. She had a daughter of her own now. I never told her about Son being sick. How could I? She had already given me so much. I couldn't bear to be a burden again. It was about a month after she left that I started feeling off, tired all the time, sick to my stomach in the mornings. I paused, my fingers stilling on his temples. There was a girl at the factory. We used to eat lunch together. One day, she came to work, and she looked gray, like all the color had been drained from her. Her eyes were red. She told me she'd just had an abortion. She already had 2 kids. Her husband's hours had been cut. They just couldn't afford another. She cried while she told me. She said, "I know it was the right thing to do, Rose, but why does it hurt so much?" It was mine. Mark was completely still beneath my hands, listening. Her words, they were like a switch flipping in my brain. It hit me all at once. The sickness, the exhaustion, the fact that my period was weeks late. I left work early that day and went to a free clinic. They did a test, and then an ultrasound. I could see it so clearly in my mind. The cold gel on my stomach, the young doctor's kind, professional face, and then the sound. A sound that changed everything. A frantic, rhythmic whooshing that filled the tiny, windowless room. Thump, 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 thump. The doctor smiled and said, "There it is, a strong, healthy heartbeat. You're about 6 weeks along." I told Mark, my voice barely a whisper. Do you know what my first thought was? My very first thought when I heard my own child's heartbeat. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I thought, I have to get rid of it. I was 18 years old. I had no one, no real home, no future. I couldn't be a mother. I was still a child myself. So, I went to another clinic, one that asked fewer questions. They gave me 2 pills. I stopped, my throat closing up. He reached up and placed his hand over mine, his thumb gently stroking my knuckles. I went back to my apartment, I continued, finding strength in his touch. I sat on the floor with the 2 pills in my palm and a glass of water. I stared at them for what felt like hours. This was the logical thing to do, the smart thing, the only thing. I lifted my hand to my mouth, and then this wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to crawl to the bathroom. I was violently sick, and as I was kneeling there, on the cold tile floor, a thought came to me, so clear and loud, it was like someone had shouted it in my ear. This is my baby. It's fighting to live. What right did I have to stop it? So I flushed the pills down the toilet, and I sat on that floor and cried for hours. Later that night, I called Clara. I told her everything, and she didn't judge me. She just said, "Oh, honey, a baby is never a mistake. We'll figure it out. You'll be a wonderful mother." And that was all I needed to hear. I finished my story. The silence in the room was profound. He didn't move for a long time. I just kept my hand on his head, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slow rhythm of his breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "You were good at science in school, weren't you?" he asked. The question was so random, so completely out of left field. It startled me. What? No, I was terrible at it. Why? The name, he said softly. Sunday. It's a star. It's the center of everything. I was just impressed. From the first moment I heard it, a laugh bubbled up out of me. It wasn't the practiced, pretty laugh I used at the lounge. It wasn't the tired, gentle laugh I used with Sunday. This was a real laugh, rusty from disuse, a little shaky, but genuine. It was the first time he had ever heard it. "Oh, you have no idea," I said, a real smile spreading across my face. For 12 years of school, I think I mastered exactly 3 English words. Yes, no, and okay. I tapped his cheek playfully. Sun was the 4th one I really learned. He laughed too, a low, deep rumble that vibrated through my hand. And in that moment, something changed. The air between us shifted. The carefully drawn lines of our arrangement, client and provider, benefactor and dependent, dissolved into nothing. He sat up, turning to face me. The smile was gone from his face, replaced by an expression of searing intensity. He took both of my hands in his grip firm and warm. "Rose," he said, and the way he said my name was a vow. "Yes," I whispered. He looked directly into my eyes, and I saw a future in them, I had never dared to imagine. "Stop being my mistress," he said, his voice low, serious, and utterly certain. "Be my wife." The question wasn't a question. It was a destination. He had looked at the broken, tangled mess of my life, at the shame and the secrets and the sorrow, and he had decided to call it home. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs, tears welling in my eyes. My past, my dirty, shameful past. How could I possibly be worthy of a man like him? A successful, kind, unattached man choosing me. A single mother with a history she could never outrun. He saw the conflict in my face, the fear warring with a desperate, burgeoning hope. He gently squeezed my hands. "The past doesn't matter, Rose," he said, as if reading my mind. "We can only move forward. Let me take care of you. Let me take care of you, and Sunday properly." He didn't make grand promises. He didn't speak of forever. He just offered me the one thing I had never had, a safe harbor, a chance to be loved. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally spilled over, silent tears of shock and overwhelming relief. I couldn't speak. I could only throw my arms around his neck and hold on, burying my face in the crook of his neck as the sobs I had been holding back for years finally broke free. He held me, his arms a strong, steady circle around me, rocking me gently until the storm passed. "It's okay," he whispered into my hair. "You're home." That weekend, he took us to meet his mother. She lived a few hours outside the city, in a small, charming house with a sprawling garden. I was terrified. What would she think of me? Of my past? Of son? "Don't worry," Mark had assured me in the car. "My mom is the kindest person I know. She won't judge you." And he was right. His mother, a woman with kind, crinkling eyes and the same warm smile as her son, welcomed us with open arms. She fussed over son, who was immediately enamored with her and her homemade cookies. She treated me with a gentle, uncomplicated warmth that felt like coming home. But I saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes when she first saw Sunday. A brief, momentary recognition. He looks familiar. I saw it, and my heart clenched with a familiar fear. That night, tucked into the guest bedroom, I couldn't sleep. I crept out into the hallway and saw a light on under his mother's door. I heard their voices, low and serious. I know I shouldn't have, but I stopped to listen. "Are you sure, Mark?" his mother was saying. "Are you sure you truly love this girl? Or is this just pity?" It was the question I had been too afraid to ask myself. Was this love, or was this charity? I held my breath, leaning my forehead against the cool wood of the door, waiting for his answer. "No, Mom," he said, and his voice was firm, unwavering. "I love her. There's no pity. I truly love her." There was a long pause, and then I heard his mother sigh. "All right, then. I trust your judgment. I just worry that this is temporary, a passing feeling. And if this falls apart, that poor girl will be hurt all over again." She understood. As a single mother herself, Mark's father had died in an accident when he was a baby. She knew the unique loneliness and vulnerability of a woman raising a child alone. She knew what it was like to need a safe place to land. And the boy, she continued, her voice softer now, her son. "I don't care about that. A child is a child. You treat them with love, and they will love you back. It's as simple as that." Tears streamed down my face. This family, this kind, good family, was opening its arms to me, to us. They were offering me a life I never thought I deserved. Mark came out of the room a few minutes later and saw me standing there, my face wet with tears. "You heard?" he asked softly. I just nodded, unable to speak. He smiled, a gentle, loving smile. He took my hand and led me back into his mother's room. She looked surprised to see me, but then her face softened into a welcoming smile. "Come here, child," she said, patting the spot on the bed beside her. I walked over and did something I hadn't done in years. I reached out and took her hand. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for accepting me." She patted my hand. "There's nothing to thank me for. Just love each other. Be good to each other. That's all a mother wants." We drove back to the city the next day, and for the first time in my life, I felt the warm, solid weight of a future. The road ahead was still uncertain. Sun was still sick, but I wasn't walking it alone anymore. Life settled into a new, beautiful normal. Mark was no longer just the man who paid my bills. He was my partner. He was a father to my son. He played superheroes with Sun, read him bedtime stories, and drove us to every single hospital appointment. He held my hand in waiting rooms and held me at night when my fear for Sun became too much to bear. Then the call came. The one we had been waiting for. The one I had prayed for every single night. The doctor. "Rose," he said, his voice grave. "Sun's condition has taken a turn for the worse. The chemo isn't as effective as we'd hoped. We need to find a marrow donor. Immediately." The doctor's words sucked all the air from the room. The world, which had just begun to feel solid and real beneath my feet, dissolved into a terrifying gray haze. Immediately, the word was a death sentence. "What do we do?" I whispered into the phone, my voice a stranger's. I was already a registered donor. We had tested all my relatives, or the few I was willing to contact. Distant cousins who barely remembered my name. No match. "We need to find his biological father, Rose," the doctor said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's his best chance. His only chance." My heart stopped. His father, the nameless, faceless man from a drunken, half-remembered nightmare 4 years ago. The ghost who had haunted every happy moment, every milestone, every quiet fear. "I can't," I choked out, tears blurring the concerned face of Mark, who had come to stand beside me, his hand on my back. "I don't know who he is." "I see," the doctor said, a tired resignation in his voice. "We'll continue searching the international registry, of course, but..." He didn't have to finish the sentence. We both knew the odds. After I hung up, I collapsed onto the sofa, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. I stared at the wall, at the framed photo of Sun laughing on Mark's shoulders, and a wave of despair so profound, so absolute, washed over me that I thought I would drown in it. My son was dying, and it was my fault. My stupid, reckless, one-night mistake was going to kill my child. Mark knelt in front of me, taking my cold hands in his. "Rose, look at me." I couldn't look at his kind, loving face. I couldn't bear the pity I would see there. "Rose," he said again, his voice firm, forcing me to meet his gaze. "I'll do it. I'll get tested." I blinked, confused. "What? But you're not." "It doesn't matter," he said, his eyes blazing with a fierce protective light. "The doctor said it himself. Sometimes strangers are a match. We have to try everything. I have to try." This man, this incredible man, he was willing to give a piece of himself, literally, to save the son of a woman he had met in a karaoke bar, a child who was not his own. The sheer, selfless goodness of it broke through my wall of despair, and I started to sob, deep, gut-wrenching sobs of gratitude and helplessness. The next day, he went to the hospital and did the tests. We waited. For 24 hours, we lived in a state of suspended animation, every ring of the phone sending a jolt of terror and hope through my veins. The doctor called the following afternoon. He asked us both to come to his office. We sat on the stiff chairs opposite his large wooden desk, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and unspoken fear. The doctor wasn't smiling. He had a file in front of him, and he kept looking from the papers to Mark, and then to me, a strange, bewildered expression on his face. "Rose," he began, his voice strained. "You told me you couldn't contact Son's biological father." "I can't," I whispered. He pushed a paper across the desk towards me. "Then, can you please explain this to me?" I looked down at the sheet. It was a lab report, a dense block of numbers and medical terminology that I couldn't understand. It was all just a meaningless jumble. I don't understand," I said, looking up at him, my heart pounding. "What does it say?" The doctor leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. He pointed to a specific line of data on the page. "It says that the probability of these two individuals," he tapped Mark's name, then Son's, "sharing a parent-child relationship is 99.999%. He looked from my stunned face to Mark's. "I've been a doctor for 30 years. I've seen a lot of things, but I have never seen a potential marrow donor turn out to be the biological father who supposedly couldn't be found." He shook his head, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I don't know what kind of game you two are playing, but your son's life is on the line. Now, if you don't believe me, we can do a formal DNA test. But look at these markers. There is no doubt. They are father and son." He left the room then, leaving the words hanging in the air like poison gas. Father and son. Father and son. The world tilted on its axis. The past, a thing I had tried so desperately to bury and outrun, had just collided with the present with the force of a freight train. It was Mark who broke the silence. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the pieces clicking into place behind his eyes. He was remembering. 4 years ago, he said, his voice a raw whisper. I had just closed my first major deal at the firm. We went out to celebrate. A private lounge. There were clients from the partner company. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror and disbelief. "You worked there." It wasn't a question. I could only nod, my whole body trembling. "Oh my God," he breathed, burying his face in his hands. "It was you. You were the girl." He looked up, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it stole my breath. I remember waking up. I was so confused, hungover, and there was blood on the sheets. His voice broke. "I was going to wait for you to wake up, to talk to you, to take responsibility. But then I saw a text on my phone from a colleague. It said, 'Hope you enjoyed the party favor. She's the best one they've got.' And I thought, I just assumed. I assumed you were a professional, and I was your first client that night. So I left the cash, all the cash I had on me, and I left." He was rambling, the memories flooding back, rearranging themselves into a new, horrific picture. And I was watching the man I loved realize that he was the ghost I had been running from, that he was the source of my deepest shame and my greatest joy. "It was you," I whispered, the words feeling alien in my mouth. "The man from that night, the father of my son. It was you." The truth was a chasm that had opened up between us. He was the man who had pulled me up from the abyss, and he was also the one who had pushed me in. He moved from his chair and knelt before me again. But this time it wasn't with comfort. It was with a crushing, soul-deep agony. He took my hands, his own trembling violently. "Rose," he choked out, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I am so sorry for everything." I started to cry then, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of a wild, hysterical relief, of cosmic, unbelievable irony. My son's savior, The man from 1,000,000 to 1 shot was right here. He had been here all along. He has a father, I sobbed, laughing through the tears. Son has a father, and he's going to be okay. In that moment, all the pain, all the shame, all the years of struggle, they didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that the man I loved, the man who had unknowingly broken my life apart 4 years ago, was now the only person in the world who could put it back together. The man who was a stranger was my destiny. He pulled me into his arms, and we clung to each other. Two broken people finding salvation in the ruins of the past. He buried his face in my hair, his body shaking with the force of his own sobs. "I'm a monster," he whispered. "For 4 years, I've been living my life, happy and carefree, while my son, you were struggling, and he was sick. And I did nothing. I knew nothing. You know now," I said, pulling back to look at him. "That's all that matters. You're here now." He gently wiped the tears from my cheeks with his thumb. "I'll schedule the surgery," he said, his voice thick but determined. "And when son is better, when he's healthy, I'm taking my family on the trip of a lifetime." My family. The surgery was scheduled for the following Monday. The night before, we were all at the hospital, a nervous, hopeful vigil. Mark called his mother and told her everything, the whole impossible, heartbreaking, beautiful story. An hour later, she was at the door of son's hospital room. She had taken the first bus from her town, a small overnight bag in her hand. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at son, sleeping peacefully in his bed. She looked at her son, and her face was a mask of cold fury. "Mark," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Kneel." Mark, without a word of protest, sank to his knees on the cold linoleum floor. And then his mother, this kind, gentle woman who baked cookies and tended her garden, picked up a decorative plastic plant from the windowsill and brought it down across her son's back with all her strength. The pot shattered, plastic leaves and dirt scattering across the floor. "Do you know what you've done?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "I raised you better than this. I taught you to respect women. Did I teach you to get drunk and ruin a young girl's life and then abandon her?" I rushed forward, trying to intervene. "Please, don't. It's okay. It was my fault too." But she just waved me away. "Stay out of this, Rose. This is between me and my son." She looked down at Mark, whose head was bowed in shame. "You have disappointed me more than I can say." Then her anger seemed to crumble, replaced by a wave of grief. She dropped the broken plant stem, and her eyes went to son, her grandson, lying so small and pale in the hospital bed. Her face crumpled. "My poor baby," she whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "All this time, he's been suffering, and I never knew." She stayed. She refused to leave the hospital. For the next week, Mark and I became a strange, fractured, but united team. We took turns sitting by son's bed, holding his small hand, whispering promises of a future he was finally going to have. The day of the surgery, a strange and wonderful thing happened. As we were sitting in the waiting room, a knot of nerves and prayers, I heard a voice call my name. "Rose? Oh my God, is that really you?" I looked up, and my heart stopped. Standing there, looking elegant and sophisticated in a way I barely recognized, was my sister, my Lily. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was a ghost, a dream. Then she was running towards me, and I was running towards her, and we met in the middle of the hallway, clinging to each other, sobbing. "I found you," she cried into my hair. "I've been looking for you for months. I've been back for months. Where have you been?" I sobbed. "I thought you were gone forever." We told each other everything. right there in the middle of the hospital corridor, the words tumbling out in a rush of 4 lost years. Her story was a miracle. The family she had married into was kind. Her mother-in-law was Vietnamese and had understood the loneliness of being a stranger in a strange land. They had treated her like a daughter. Her husband was a good man. They had a daughter of their own. The only thing was, they had been afraid she would run away, so for years, they had forbidden her from contacting us. It was only recently that they had relented and let her come home to find her family. And just as we were finishing our stories, just as I was introducing her to Mark and his mother, the light above the operating room door went off. The doctor came out, pulling off his surgical mask. He was smiling. "Congratulations," he said, his eyes finding mine. The surgery was a complete success. The world exploded into light and color. I was laughing and crying at the same time, holding my sister's hand on one side and my future mother-in-law's on the other. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated joy, I looked at Mark's mother, and a new word came to my lips, a word I hadn't said in 20 years. "Mom," I said, my voice thick with tears. "He's going to be okay." She looked at me, her own eyes shining, and she nodded. "Yes, daughter, he is." Son's recovery was slow but steady. Every day, he got a little stronger, a little more color back in his cheeks, and our strange, blended miracle of a family surrounded him with a fierce, protective love. My sister stayed for another week before she had to return to her own family, promising to bring her husband and daughter to meet us all next time. A month later, Son was discharged. He ran out of the hospital doors and into Mark's waiting arms. A healthy, happy little boy, finally free. That night, as we lay in bed, with Son sleeping peacefully in his room down the hall, tucked in by his grandmother, Mark turned to me. "Marry me, Rose," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Tomorrow, let's go to the courthouse, and then next month, we'll have a real wedding, a party, to celebrate all of this." I smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with my finger. "Okay, I was thinking," he said, placing his hand over my stomach. "Maybe it's time to think about a name for Son's little sister." I froze. "What?" He grinned, his eyes sparkling. My mom noticed. "You've been tired, off your food. She thinks you're pregnant." Pregnant, again, but this time was different. This time, there was no fear, no shame, only a deep, profound, and overwhelming joy. "What do you think of Luna?" he whispered, kissing my forehead. "Luna?" I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "The moon?" He laughed. "What? You know that one too?" "Of course," I said, snuggling closer to him, feeling his warmth, his love, surrounding me like a shield. "That makes 5 words." He held me tight, a husband's embrace, a promise, a beginning. He whispered in my ear, the 3 words that had taken a lifetime of pain to reach. "I love you." And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it had taken us both a lifetime to learn how to say them, and we would spend the rest of our lives showing each other what they meant.